In this video I create a folding lockback knife which is designed to be a useful everyday pen knife. I decided to create this knife to replace one I bought when I was very young. It looked like this. I always thought it was a sheep herder's knife, but it turns out it's an old navy knife made in Sheffield. Horn handle. I'd used it frequently until 2014 when it was unfortunately stolen while I was camping. I was rather annoyed by losing my old knife, but I saw it as a chance to trade up as the old spring back was sloppy and the design had no point on it. I first found a clip point design that I adapted to my own hand grip and the UK legal carry length. I made a basic template out of sheet metal, and once happy everything would fit together, I proceeded to make the final piece. I used a piece of high carbon steel from a FAG bearing raceway or something for the blades and the locking lever, brass for the spring mounting, and a piece of suspension coil spring for the spring. I first took a small sample from the ring for hardening testing, and after doing a couple of tests, heating it up and dunking it in oil, cooling it with air, and sticking it into cold water, I said the oil quenching seemed to be the thing for this. The water quenching left a hairline crack right through the middle of the piece, so I can only assume this is an oil hardening steel without knowing any more about the part. Testing with the file proved that it hardened, so I was pretty happy with the technique. We took half the ring and forced it flat and wide, bringing it down from 10mm to 4mm, which took an incredible amount of effort. At this point I would mention that anyone planning on making a folding knife would probably be best to use bar stock, as once you've hammered it out you need to level off all the hammer marks and get everything the same thickness, which is tricky. I also flattened the other end of the sheared coil spring for the internal spring of the lockback. The next stage involved tracing out template parts onto my forest metal bar, then cutting and grinding the parts out. Unlike my previous knife, it was hard to shape the parts as these needed to fit together and were very small and quite delicate. See here, I'm shaping the lock on the back of the blade first, as suggested by Harold Hoffman in his Advanced Knife Making Manual, and then working on the lock back and the spring lock and finally the spring. Trying to level out and thin down quite a lot of the parts so that they would match, seeing as my hammer marks, and working on it in that way, it just left it thicker in places. I made the liners at 1mm sheet steel and cut them out. And here you can see the final mechanism with one of the liners in the back. You got the brass spring lock on the side there. At this point I am marking out where all my pins are going to be, ready for drilling. I was going to use 2mm brass rod for most of the pins apart from the hinge, but because the chuck on the drill press is all messed up, I ended up having to use 4mm drill bit for every one of the holes. We're putting the holes through the liners. At this point I'm cutting the spring for the locking mechanism. This is a piece of spring steel from a car suspension coil I found beside the road. You can see here the template with the spring piece down here at the bottom that will fit into the notch in the spring lock. reminded myself to put a spring temper on that spring. And the final stage is adding the grip. Filing down the spring so it's as thin as possible and gives a good rebound on the lockback. It was quite a fiddly operation. Deburring the liners. Finally flattening out some dents left from drilling. Here's the first assembly showing the locking mechanism and spring. Now without the other liner in there, everything pings apart. I decided to make grips out of a local material given to me by my sister as a Christmas present. It's made out of heather stalks, which are dyed and then compressed together with epoxy, forming this block. Now working with this stuff is a lot like working with plastic. Sanding and sawing of it tends to make it melt. So I roughly shaped it out using the table saw, using the bandsaw, and finally quite a lot of hand filing and sanding because any sort of power sander on this and it just burns. It leaves black marks and it's rather horrible. So just drilling out the holes in line with the liners. Okay, now the hardening process I can do indoors because the parts are so small. I can just heat them up with a blowtorch in this makeshift kiln here. First dunking them into sawdust to give them a nice surface coating of carbon. Taking out the blade here and making the maker's mark on it. You've got to be dead quick with these small parts because they lose heat so fast, like into the anvil and everything. And that's looking good. One hit with the maker's mark, otherwise it will leave a double impression. And finally the hardening process by dumping it into filthy black old engine oil, which I hear is pretty good for a surface hardening effect. Gotta be quick. And don't breathe this. Oh. And oil all over the table. Yep. Usual mess. So now just finally sharpening up that edge. After getting it about 90% done in time for the hardening, I give it a final edge at the end. And now the tempering process, you're trying to get blue along the back, not grey, and trying to keep it away from the blade edge and the tip. Now the final assembly. It was quite a bother to put this thing together once you've got all the pieces drilled out and everything. They're really quite tight, and if anything moves, your spring can jump out of place. So most people use a table jig. Finally putting in the pins and pinning them and gluing the whole thing together with epoxy resin. Now in this stage, the pinning process had actually cracked my epoxy heather composite material, so I mixed up some more epoxy resin with brass shavings in it. Not exactly for strength, but more for a shiny, colourful effect, and wedged that into the crack. The final piece, as you can see there, it works quite well. It's got nowhere near as much play as my old one. It's got a point on it. It locks in place, but not too hard, so you can actually close it by hand. and a ring at the back for attaching to a belt or a chain or something like that. Fantastic. And I would never have made this if somebody hadn't nicked my old one.